The desert doesn't forgive guesswork. It holds heat in layers and releases it on its own schedule. The way a rifle barrel holds tension until it decides to walk. Sand shifts under boots and remembers nothing. Wind changes direction without announcing itself. And the only mercy it offers is that it does the same thing to everyone. On the north shoulder of a broken ridgeline, a lone figure lay behind a rock that had been split by old weather. No one had assigned her that rock. No one had told her to climb. The position offered a clean field to the valley floor and an ugly angle to the road that cut through it. A thin scar of dust and stone that looked harmless until you measured it. She had measured it. Her elbows were dug into the gravel. Her body was flat, not relaxed, efficient. A posture built to keep the pulse from translating into the scope. A small notebook lay open to a page already filled with neat, compressed handwriting. Not a diary, not a list of feelings, a ledger of variables. She lifted a pinch of sand with 2 fingers, raised it to shoulder height, and let it fall. It didn't fall straight. Her eyes tracked it, not the grains themselves, but the shape of their drift. She watched the first drop, then the second, then a third, timed against the same outcropping downrange. She didn't glance at the horizon for reassurance. She looked at the near ground. Wind lied at distance. Close wind told the truth. She slid a thin cord from her pocket and laid it across the rock, one end pinned under a small flat stone. A simple tell. If the cord trembled, she would know. If it hung still, she would know something else. A convoy route map set under her left hand, edges weighted by 2 empty casings. The casings weren't random. They were placed to keep the paper from lifting in the exact pattern the wind favored on that ridge. She didn't look up when a distant engine note rose and fell. She listened for spacing, for load, for the way the note changed when a vehicle climbed, when it braked, when it idled. A soft scrape behind her, rock on rubber sole. Someone moving carefully, but not carefully enough. She didn't turn her head. She shifted her left boot 2 centimeters and pressed it into the gravel. A silent brace. If the figure behind her stumbled, she could roll without losing the rifle's alignment. A shadow crossed her notebook. Broad shoulders, long torso. The shadow stayed still for a full 7 seconds before the man stepped into her peripheral vision. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hale didn't speak often. When he did, it was because silence had stopped being useful. He watched her range card. He watched the cord. He watched the 2 casings holding the map. He crouched without a sound that would carry. Old knees. Old habits. He kept his voice low. Not conspiratorial. Just respectful of physics. You've been up here. It wasn't a question. It wasn't praise. It was an observation, like noting that a rifle's safety was off. She kept her cheek welded to the stock of a rifle that wasn't hers. The rifle lay inert, bolt back, chamber open, no round anywhere near it. Her hands rested lightly, fingers positioned as if she could move without wasted motion. Yes, Master Guns. He stared at the optic. He didn't touch it. A man who had learned not to contaminate another shooter system without permission. The elevation turret had a thin pencil mark, a line so faint it looked like a manufacturing defect. She had placed it. A reference point for a specific distance. Not the 0. Something else. Hale's eyes went to the notebook again. The page wasn't labeled with the usual comfort words. No wind. No drop. No hold. Just columns. Distance in meters. Temperature in Celsius. Pressure in hectopascals. Angle in degrees. Spin drift in centimeters at range. A final column with single-letter corrections that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't written them. He read one line twice. Then he looked at her hands. The skin around her fingernails was clean. No nervous tearing. No raw edges. Her gear was arranged in a way that suggested she had packed it the same way for years and had stopped thinking about it. He let a breath out through his nose. Not approval. Recognition. Still keeping books. 3 words. Understated. Heavy. He had said more at funerals. She lifted her head just enough to look at him without breaking her position. Her eyes were steady. Not challenging. Not shy. Present. Books keep people alive. Hale held her gaze for one beat longer than necessary. A private signal. A quiet acknowledgement that he understood what she was doing up here, alone, before anyone else arrived. He didn't ask why she had a range card for a mission she wasn't supposed to be planning. He didn't ask why she was behind a rifle she wasn't assigned. He shifted his weight and looked out into the valley. Down there, the road bent around a cluster of ruined compound walls and a dried irrigation cut. It looked like nothing. It looked like everything. Hale spoke again, as if making sure the words existed in the world. You see it. She didn't point. Pointing was for people who wanted credit. She slid the notebook a few centimeters and tapped a single coordinate she had written in the margin. A grid reference. Precise. Tight. Hale's eyes narrowed. He tracked it to the terrain, aligning the numbers with reality. His jaw tightened once, a small movement that might have been nothing to anyone else. He said nothing. Silence was his way of saying he believed her. He rose and stepped back the way he had come, careful not to send gravel down the slope. He didn't tell her to move. He didn't tell her to stay. He simply left her with the one thing that mattered. He had seen her. She returned her cheek to the stock. She watched the cord. She watched the sand. She listened. Far below, engines multiplied. Tires found the road. Metal moved into the valley like it always did, as if the valley had never once punished that assumption. She wrote one more line in the notebook. Not a calculation. A note. Second terrace. New rock scars. She didn't underline it. She didn't circle it. She didn't need decoration to make it urgent. That was the detail that didn't belong. New rock scars meant recent impact. Not weather. Not erosion. Impact. Heavy caliber. Repeated. Someone else had been ranging that road, and they had done it from a place the Marines hadn't mapped yet. The patrol base sat in a bowl of broken stone and baked earth. HESCO barriers formed a rough perimeter that looked solid from a distance and felt temporary up close, like everything in places that refused to be owned. A comms tent hummed. A generator coughed. Dust found its way into every seam. Inside the small operation space, the air was thick with laminated maps and fatigue. A whiteboard held grid references, call signs, and a schedule that pretended the world would follow it. Captain Morales stood with both hands on the edge of a folding table. Decorated. Calm. Her uniform was clean in a way that suggested she still believed in standards, even here. Her eyes moved from one face to another, measuring readiness with the economy of someone who had done this too many times to dramatize it. She spoke in clipped phrases. Convoy leaves on my mark. 6 vehicles. Interval stays consistent. No hero gaps. The Marines around her nodded. Familiar ritual. It wasn't comfort. It was procedure. Procedure was what people held when the environment offered nothing to hold. Sergeant Briggs leaned against a wall with the casual confidence of a man who had been right enough times to forget what it felt like to be wrong. He wore the scout sniper patch with the ease of someone who believed it said everything necessary. Lance Corporal Kwan stood near the radios, hands already busy, adjusting a handset cable that didn't need adjustment. Minimal movement. Quiet competence. He kept his eyes down and his ears open. The fifth figure in the room was the one no one looked at twice. She stood slightly back from the table, not trying to disappear, not forcing herself into the center. Her posture took up the minimum space, while still leaving her a direct line of sight to the map. Her uniform read Sato on the tape. The rank insignia on her collar was small, low, the kind of rank that people used as a filter. Her hair was cut to regulation. No loose strands. No show. A thin smear of graphite marked the side of her thumb, as if she had been writing recently. Captain Morales glanced at her once, the way a competent leader accounts for everybody in the room. Corporal Sato. The rank was said cleanly. No sarcasm. Just classification. Yes, ma'am. Morales tapped a spot on the map with a marker. You're on comms and casualty collection. You stay with Kwan. You do not float. 2 sentences. A boundary. Rational. Based on the file she had been given. Sato nodded once. Understood. Briggs let out a short laugh that he cut off quickly when he saw the captain's eyes shift. He waited until Morales turned back to the map. Then he spoke, loud enough to be heard, soft enough to pretend it wasn't meant to carry. Comms and casualties. Perfect lane. A few Marines smirked. Not cruelty. Social gravity. The room always wanted a hierarchy it could feel. Sato didn't change expression. No tightening around the mouth. No flare in the eyes. She kept her gaze on the map. Briggs pushed one step further, because the room let him. You ever touch a rifle outside qualification day, Corporal? Sato's eyes moved to Briggs's boots, then to his hands, then to his face. A scan that lasted less than a second. Not evaluation. Accounting. Yes. One word. No story attached. No defense offered. Briggs laughed again, sharper. Sure. Sato looked back at the map. She didn't blink faster. She didn't clench her jaw. She didn't shift her weight. The same pace. The same focus. Hale entered without announcement. The room adjusted around him the way it did around terrain. He wasn't the commander. He was older than authority. He carried 28 years in his posture and didn't need to mention it. Morales acknowledged him with a nod. Master guns. Hale didn't respond with ceremony. He stood behind Morales and looked at the map as if deciding whether it deserved his attention. Briggs straightened slightly. Not fear. Respect. Habit. Hale's eyes moved once briefly to Sato. A glance so small it would have been missed by anyone not watching for it. Sato didn't react, but her hand shifted on the edge of the table, a subtle adjustment, as if someone had changed the wind. Morales continued. Overwatch position on Ridge 17. Sniper team rotates. 2 hours each. Briggs, you run it. Briggs nodded, satisfied. Morales capped the marker. Any concerns, say them now. Silence held for a moment. The kind of silence that people mistake for agreement. Sato's voice cut through it, controlled and level. Ma'am. Grid 42S XD31876-04921 has fresh impact scars. Heavy caliber. Likely ranging the road. The room turned slightly. Not everyone. Enough. Morales's eyes narrowed. Not anger. Processing. Source. Sato didn't say Hale. She didn't point to him. She didn't create a social problem to solve. Observed. Rock faces on the second terrace. Pattern consistent with repeated shots. Briggs exhaled through his nose. Observed. From where? Sato answered without looking at him. Ridge 17 shoulder. North rock split. Clear line. Morales's gaze flicked to the schedule on the board. Then back to the map. She weighed time, manpower, and the credibility the system assigned to a corporal with a comms task. Snipers will confirm when they set Overwatch. Sato's tone didn't change. Ma'am, the position is outside our current sector sketch. It's not on the overlay. Whoever is using it has elevation and concealment. Morales held still for 2 seconds. A leader's pause. Not indecision. Discipline. Then she made the call that was rational with the data she had. Noted. We're rolling. Briggs will adjust Overwatch based on his assessment. Sato nodded once. Understood. Briggs smiled slightly. Social victory. He didn't need to be cruel. The system did the work for him. Hale said nothing. He didn't rescue her in public. He didn't validate her in front of the group. That wasn't how you protected someone like that. Not early. Not when the room was still addicted to its assumptions. Morales looked at the Marines. Mount up. Chairs scraped. Plates shifted. The room emptied in practiced motion. Sato remained for half a second longer than everyone else. She stepped to the whiteboard and wrote the grid reference again, smaller, in the corner, where it wouldn't be erased by accident. Then she walked out with Quan, her pace steady, her hands already moving through a mental checklist. Outside, the sun sat high enough to flatten shadows and make distance deceptive. Mirage shimmered in the low ground. Heat rose in visible waves, distorting the road and the ruins until they looked like they were moving. The desert didn't care that a decision had just been made on incomplete information. It didn't punish arrogance. It punished physics. Sato looked at the sky once. Not for beauty, for clarity, for the thinness of cloud at the horizon. She adjusted her sling by one notch. Quan watched her hands and mirrored the movement on his radio harness, tightening a strap without being told. No dialogue, just alignment. The convoy moved like a measured organism. 6 vehicles. Standard interval. A lead MRAP. 2 trucks. A second MRAP. A wrecker. A rear security vehicle. Dust rose behind each one in a consistent plume that made them easy to track from distance and hard to see from inside. The dust got into everything. The engines ran hot. The Marines inside held their rifles with the kind of casual grip that came from long repetition. On the ridge, the sniper team settled into position. Briggs lay behind his rifle and adjusted the bipod legs until they were even. His spotter, a younger Marine named Devers, set the spotting scope on a small tripod and leveled it with care. Briggs's rifle was a Marine Corps M40A6, matte finish, suppressor mounted. Standard, reliable, familiar. Devers called out distances. Briggs dialed and held. Their movement was competent. Their breathing was controlled. They were good at what they had trained for. The environment had no obligation to respect that. Sato lay 30 meters off their position, slightly higher, tucked into a pocket of broken stone that cut her silhouette. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had been assigned comms and casualties. She had obeyed the letter by keeping the radio with Quan. Quan was with her, low and quiet, the antenna angled to reduce profile. She had not obeyed the spirit of staying off the ridge. She had made a calculation. Risk versus consequence. Quan watched the convoy through binoculars. He didn't ask why they were here. He had seen enough to understand that questions wasted time when time could be used to observe. Sato watched the second terrace, the one she had written about. A cluster of stones formed a rough line there, too straight to be natural. A small patch of darker shadow held steady even as the mirage shifted. Shadow could be rock. Shadow could be cloth. Shadow could be something else. She didn't raise her optics immediately. She looked with naked eye first, because magnification made people lazy. She noted 3 things. A glint that lasted less than half a second. Not sun on stone. Too sharp. A movement that wasn't movement. A slight change in the shape of the shadow, like a shoulder settling. A thin line of disturbed dust that drifted down the slope in a way that suggested something had been moved recently. She wrote in her notebook with a pencil she kept tethered to her wrist by a thin cord. Glass. Shoulder. Dust fall. No adjectives. No drama. Evidence. The convoy reached the bend near the ruined compound. Briggs shifted his rifle slightly. He was tracking a window line. Devers whispered into his ear. Possible observer, 2nd story, left. Briggs murmured back. Confirm. They were doing their job. Sato's eyes stayed on the terrace. The cord on her rock trembled twice. A small vibration. Not wind. Something else. She listened. A sound reached her after the fact. A distant crack. Not an explosion. A rifle report. Heavy. Supersonic. The crack was sharp because the bullet had passed somewhere it shouldn't. A half-second later, a puff of dust erupted near the convoy's lead vehicle, off to the right side of the road. The driver didn't stop. Training. Keep moving. A second crack. Another puff. This time closer. The dust rose in a tight column, consistent with impact from a high-velocity round. Devers stiffened. Contact. Marksman. Briggs's voice tightened. Not panic. Urgency. Where? Devers swung the spotting scope, scanning windows, scanning ridges. The environment offered too many places to hide. Sato already had one. She pressed her face into her binoculars and looked directly at the terrace shadow. The glint came again. Very brief. A scope lens or a rangefinder. Someone confident enough to expose glass because they believed no one was looking back. Sato's left hand moved to the radio handset. She didn't key it yet. She counted. 1, 2, 3. The third count ended with another crack. The shooter was firing on a rhythm. Sato keyed the radio. Ridge Overwatch. Shooter at 2nd Terrace. Grid 42S XD31876-04921. Repeat. Shooter at 31,876-04921. Heavy caliber. Rate of fire 11 seconds. Her voice was flat. Not excited. Not trying to convince. Just delivering usable data. Briggs's head snapped slightly toward her position, surprised to hear her voice on the net from the ridge. Devers looked too, eyes wide. Briggs keyed his mic. Say again. You're sure? Sato didn't answer his doubt. She answered the mission. Confirmed glint. Confirmed rhythm. Impacts consistent with 12.7. A pause on the net. Not disbelief. Processing. Morales' voice cut in from the convoy command vehicle. Overwatch. Suppress. Briggs breathed once, steadied, and began to work. He shifted his rifle toward the terrace. He dialed elevation. He held wind. He fired one shot. The suppressor turned the report into a dull thump. The recoil rolled into his shoulder. Devers watched through glass. Mississippi low. Dust right. Briggs adjusted. Fired again. Mississippi high. Wind. Briggs's jaw tightened. The terrace shooter fired again. Another impact. This one hit the lead MRAP's front right wheel well. Metal sparked. The vehicle lurched, but kept moving. Inside the convoy, Marines tensed. Hands tightened on rifles. Heads dipped lower behind armor. Sato watched the rhythm. The shooter wasn't just shooting. He was walking them into a stop. He was aiming at mechanical failure, not flesh. A calculated attempt to immobilize. She keyed the radio again. He's not trying to kill. He's trying to halt. Will Wells. Engine blocked next. Morales responded instantly. Keep moving. Briggs fired a third shot. Devers watched. Mississippi Briggs's breathing changed. Slightly faster. Not fear. Friction. The plan was failing. Mirage thickened in the low ground. Heat waves distorted the terrace. The shooter's position blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again, as if the earth itself was trying to hide him. Briggs cursed under his breath without words that needed repeating. A tight exhale of frustration. He fired again. Devers said nothing for a second. Then, quietly, still miss. Briggs's competence was real, but it was being forced outside its normal parameters. He had trained for range, for wind, for pressure. He had not trained for a shooter who had already pre-ranged the road and was exploiting Mirage like a tool. Sato's hands were steady. She watched the terrace, not through magnification now, but through the narrow gap between two stones. A crude aperture that cut Mirage by limiting the field. Old trick. Not mystical. Optical discipline. The shooter's outline sharpened. A long barrel. A thick muzzle brake. Too large for a standard rifle. An anti-material weapon. The kind of system that punched through engines. Sato didn't say, I told you. She didn't need the social victory. She keyed the radio. Briggs. Your hold is wrong. Mirage layer is shifting at 1.4 meters above ground. Use a lower line. Aim through the darker band. Briggs's head moved again, anger flickering. Not at her. At the situation. At the fact that the corporal on comms was telling him how to shoot. He didn't answer. He tried it anyway. Because even the blind skeptic still wanted to win. He adjusted. Fired. Devers's voice changed. Impact. Near. Left. Near wasn't enough. The terrace shooter fired again, and this time the round hit the second vehicle in line, a truck carrying water and fuel. The impact punched metal and sent a spray of fluid into the dust. The truck slowed. Interval collapsed. The convoy compressed. That was the kill zone forming in real time. The desert didn't adjust itself to human plans. It did not register intent. It had no mechanism to account for preparation. Then the IED went. Not a Hollywood detonation. Not a fireball. A sharp, violent lift of earth and metal that punched up beneath the road just ahead of a slowing truck. A burst of pressure. A crack that hit the chest. The truck's front end rose and slammed down. The convoy stopped because it had to. Urgency appeared. Not in screaming. In motion. Doors opening. Marines spilling out into the dust, forming arcs, taking cover, behind wheels and armor. Morales' voice was controlled on the net. Contact front. Establish security. Overwatch, find the shooter. Briggs's breathing was audible now, a thin rasp in the mic he didn't realize was open. Working. The terrace shooter fired again. The round hit the rear MRAP's side, not penetrating, but ringing the armor like a bell. The convoy was pinned. Standard approach had failed. Sato's eyes moved once, scanning the road edges, the compound walls, the dried irrigation cut. The IED had been placed where it would force the stop. Not random. Not lucky. She had seen the pattern in her head days ago, not as a fear, but as a sequence. She key-clicked twice, a habit to ensure the handset was seated. Quan. Quan shifted closer, his face still blank, his hands already moving to adjust frequencies without being asked. Sato spoke without raising her voice. Patch me to company net and battalion fire desk. Now, Quan didn't ask why. He didn't hesitate. He performed the action that mattered, under pressure, with the precision of someone who understood that radios were weapons when used correctly. His fingers flew, controlled, exact. A frequency change. An encryption, fill check. A quick handshake with the relay. He kept his breathing low. Patched. Sato keyed up. Battalion. This is Ridge Overwatch. Immediate danger close suppression required. Grid 42S XD3187604921. Shooter in defilade. Secondary cache, likely behind position. The fire desk voice answered, calm and procedural. Identify yourself. Sato didn't give her name first. She gave what the system needed. Observer has eyes. Requesting immediate check fire authority under ROE Annex C, paragraph 4. A pause. The pause was the reveal beginning, though no one on the ridge understood it yet. Annex C, paragraph 4 was not something a corporal on comms quoted casually. It was specific. It was buried. It was used by people who lived inside the rules because they had seen what happened when people improvised them. The fire desk voice returned, slower. State your call sign. Sato's answer was a single word. Iron Wolf. The net went still for one beat. Not dramatic silence. Operational silence. The kind that happens when a system recognizes a credential it didn't expect to hear from the mouth that spoke it. Briggs looked over his rifle. Eyes narrowed. Devers froze, spotting scope mid-sweep. Quan didn't look up. He kept his hands on the radio. But his posture shifted. A slight straightening, like someone had just entered the room. Morales' voice cut in, controlled but sharper. Who is Iron Wolf? Sato didn't answer the question. She answered the mission. Authority requested. Shooter is pinning convoy into IED alley. If convoy stays static, secondary teams will close within 6 minutes. Morales responded. Overwatch, you are not the commander. Sato's voice didn't change. No, ma'am. She let the word sit. Not defiance. Fact. Then, because she was still inside proper channels, she continued. I am the only observer with a clear line to the terrace's back face. Your shooters are fighting Mirage. I can place a round into the cache point. Briggs keyed his mic, anger now visible in the edge of his voice. You're not taking my rifle. Sato's eyes stayed on the terrace. She watched the shooter reposition slightly, shifting weight, preparing for the next engine block shot. She didn't argue. She didn't negotiate. She said one sentence, quiet, functional, stripped of emotion. Can I borrow your rifle? Briggs stared. The phrase landed wrong in his mind because it carried no apology, no challenge, no fear. It was an operational request, like asking for a tourniquet. Devers looked between them, unsure. Another crack from the terrace. The round hit the lead MRAP's hood and ricocheted, sparks jumping. Morales' voice came tight on the net. Briggs, suppressed now. Briggs fired again. Mississippi Sato didn't move fast. Fast was sloppy. She moved with efficiency. She slid back from her rock pocket and crawled low across the ridge to Briggs's position. Her body stayed below the skyline. Her knees and elbows found the same contact points every time. No wasted shift. No gear clatter. A round cracked overhead and snapped into stone behind them. A hard, sharp sound of impact that sent chips into the air. Briggs flinched. Minimal. Human. Sato did not. She reached Briggs's position and stopped beside him, not in front, not crowding his sight line. She held out her left hand. Briggs hesitated for exactly 2 seconds. Those 2 seconds were not cowardice. They were identity trying to hold itself together. Then another round hit the convoy, and the sound forced the decision. Briggs pulled his rifle back and shoved it toward her. Make it count. Sato took the rifle as if it were fragile. Not because she was reverent, because she respected systems. She checked the safety without looking. She checked the bolt. She checked the turret marks. Her fingers found the pencil line she had placed earlier. She lay behind it, her cheek welded to the stock as if it belonged there. She breathed in, held, let out. Her breathing was slow enough that Devers noticed it. Devers whispered, almost without meaning to, "What are you doing?" Sato didn't answer with words. She answered with behavior. She lifted her left hand and adjusted the rear bag by a fraction. She shifted the bipod legs a notch lower. She lowered her line of sight into the darker mirage band she had described. She didn't chase the shooter. She tracked the environment around him. Behind the terrace position, a small cut in the terrain formed a shallow pocket. Dirt was darker there, recently disturbed, covered with a thin layer of loose stone that didn't match the surrounding pattern. A cache, not a guess. A signature. Sato counted. The shooter fired every 11 seconds, but the last interval had been 9. He was accelerating. He wanted the engine block shot now. Sato waited for the next shot, not to react, to use it. At the moment the terrace rifle fired, a brief bloom of dust appeared at the muzzle, a small signature in the air that mirage could not fully hide. Sato used that fraction of a second to confirm the exact muzzle position. Then she moved her reticle 0.7 mils down and 0.4 mils right into the pocket behind him. She didn't dial. She held. Dialing was slow. Holding was faster. Holding required a mind that could maintain precision without mechanical reassurance. She exhaled halfway and paused. Her trigger press was straight back. No jerk. No anticipation. The rifle fired. The suppressor thumped. The recoil rolled. Devers watched through the spotting scope. He saw the round impact the dark pocket. At first, nothing happened. 1 second. 2. Then the pocket erupted. Not a single explosion. A chain. A sequence of cook-offs, each one triggered by the last, turning stored ammunition and fuel into pressure and fire. Dust and debris punched upward, and the terrace position vanished under it, swallowed by its own logistics. The terrace rifle stopped. The shot stopped. On the convoy net, Marines breathed again, without realizing they had been holding breath. Morales' voice came through, still controlled. Confirm effect. Sato didn't look away from the scope. She watched for secondary movement, for a survivor crawling, for a second shooter. Her voice was clinical. Cache detonated. Shooter neutralized. Terrace position collapsed. Briggs stared at her hands as if trying to understand how the rifle had obeyed her differently than it had obeyed him. He didn't speak. Devers's voice was small. 1 shot. Sato stayed on glass. 1 shot is a delivery method, she said, and that was the closest thing to philosophy she offered in the middle of crisis. The battalion fire desk came back on the net, a different voice now. Higher. More certain. Iron Wolf, this is battalion. Confirm you are cleared to call effects. Stand by for record. Morales keyed in immediately. Battalion, identify Iron Wolf. The response was not emotional. It was administrative, which made it heavier. Captain Morales, Iron Wolf is a certified precision engagement instructor. Weapons Training Battalion Detachment. Clearance level and qualification on file. Your roster is outdated. A pause. Not because Morales was slow. Because the world had just rearranged itself in her mind. Morales' voice returned lower. Corporal Sato. Sato kept her eyes on the valley. Yes, ma'am. Morales spoke 1 sentence that carried the weight of a leader making the most difficult decision. Take the ridge. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. It was excellence. Operational intelligence. A competent authority stepping back when the data changed. Briggs's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He didn't fight it. Not now. Not with the convoy still in danger. Hale's voice came quietly on the net. The first time he had spoken in public since morning. Let her work. 4 words. 28 years inside them. Sato didn't nod. No visible reaction. She simply shifted her focus, because the mission was not finished. The convoy was still stopped. The IED alley still existed. The compound walls still held unknown eyes. The desert still waited, indifferent. And in the far right edge of her scope, beyond the collapsed terrace, she saw dust plumes rising in a pattern that did not match wind. Vehicles. Moving fast. Not the convoy. Not friendly. She wrote a single number in her notebook. 2. Then she keyed the radio. Second problem incoming. Sato didn't wait for permission to be believed. She watched the far edge of the valley through the same narrow aperture between stones, because mirage punished anyone who tried to dominate it with magnification. Dust plumes rose in pairs, not random gusts. Symmetrical. The spacing held. Vehicles. At least 5. They moved along the hardpan north of the road, using the shallow folds that broke line of sight from the convoy. They weren't racing because they were careless. They were moving fast because they had rehearsed the timing. Sato's left hand stayed on the rifle's fore-end. Her right thumb rolled the safety off and back on once, a quiet check, then left it on. She wasn't shooting yet. She was counting. Kwan's face was turned toward her, waiting without asking. The radio handset rested in his palm. His other hand hovered over the frequency selector like a surgeon's hand over an artery. Briggs lay beside them, now without the rifle that had been part of his identity minutes ago. He was watching the valley with naked eyes, jaw set, trying to regain footing in a reality that had shifted under him. Devers stayed behind the spotting scope, breath shallow, as if he feared sound itself might ruin the picture. Sato spoke into the net with the same flat delivery as before. Convoy Ridge. QRF movement. North Hardpan. Bearing 012 from the bend. 5 vehicles. Speed 62 kilometers per hour. Time to contact 3 minutes 40 seconds if unimpeded. Morales answered immediately, voice steady. Where are they coming from? Sato didn't say, from the place I flagged. She gave data. From beyond the second terrace. Using the drainage line. They're staying off the road. Morales's voice tightened by one small degree. Any heavy weapons? Sato tracked the lead vehicle shape. A pickup. Long bed. Something mounted in the rear. The silhouette wasn't a simple roll bar. It had a vertical spine. A DSHK 12.7. Same caliber as the Terrace rifle. Lead technical has a 12.7 mounted. Second vehicle appears to be cargo with canvas. 2 more pickups. 1 sedan likely comms. Briggs exhaled once, slow. He understood the geometry now. Shooter to halt. IED to stop. QRF to finish. Standard convoy response would be to push through, but the lead vehicle's wheel well had been hit. The fuel truck was damaged. The IED crater blocked the road. The convoy was pinned in a place chosen for it. Morales issued orders on the net. No raised voice. No theater. Dismount teams. Establish north security. Heavy gun up. Prepare to break contact. The convoy's Marines moved with practiced urgency. They weren't panicking. They were doing the only thing they could do. The environment did not reward effort. It rewarded correct decisions. Sato shifted her focus to the terrain between the QRF and the convoy. A shallow depression ran across the hardpan, almost invisible unless you knew how to look for changes in dust texture. A wash line. It cut diagonally and ended in a cluster of rocks that made a natural choke point. If the QRF continued straight, they would cross that depression in 42 seconds. If they tried to avoid it, they would have to swing east, exposing themselves against the sky for 170 meters. Either choice had a cost. Sato measured the distance from her ridge position to the choke point using the map overlay she had weighted earlier. She didn't need to estimate. She had already drawn the line. Distance, 1,460 meters. Wind at ridge, 6 meters per second, quartering from left. Wind at ground, 2 meters per second, variable. Angle, 12 degrees down. Briggs's rifle was chambered in 7.62 by 51. At 1,460 meters, it was outside comfortable doctrine for most shooters, especially with mirage and shifting wind. Not impossible. Unforgiving. Sato didn't describe it as difficult. She simply began to build the shot. She adjusted the elevation turret in a smooth, controlled roll. No hesitation. The pencil line she had placed earlier came into view, and she stopped exactly on it. A mark made for this distance. Not a coincidence. Preparation. Devers leaned forward as if pulled. He whispered, not into a radio, just to the air. "You planned this." Sato didn't answer him with a sentence. She answered with a small behavior. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a thin, folded strip of paper, already creased. A hand-drawn range card for the valley. It had grid references and distances for key terrain points, including the wash line choke point. She had made it before the convoy rolled. She slid it under a casing so the wind couldn't take it. Briggs saw it. His face did something quiet and involuntary. Not anger, not shock. A recognition that the world had been speaking in signs, and he hadn't been reading. Sato's voice went into the net again. "Morales, if QRF reaches the depression, they will set the 12.7 and rake the convoy. Request permission to engage lead technical at the wash line." Morales paused for one beat. Not because she doubted Sato now, but because she was a commander and every shot had consequences. Engage. One word. Clean. Final. Sato settled behind the rifle. Her breathing slowed, not as a dramatic act, but as a mechanical requirement. She tracked the lead technical as it approached the depression. The gunner in the bed stood behind the mount, hands on the spade grips, body loose with the confidence of someone who had not yet been punished by return fire. The technical hit a small bump. The gunner's shoulders rose and fell once. That bump gave Sato a fraction of a second of predictability. She didn't aim at the gunner's chest. Chest shots were for people who wanted a moral narrative. She aimed at the mount base, where the gun's recoil would translate into metal failure and force the vehicle to stop or abandon the weapon. A shot that removed capability instead of focusing on flesh. Not mercy. Efficiency. She held 0.6 mils left for wind. She waited until the technical reached the exact point where the depression began to dip. The vehicle's suspension compressed. The front end lowered by a measurable amount. She pressed the trigger. The rifle thumped. Recoil rolled. Devers watched through glass. The round hit the mount base. Metal sparked. The DSH case spine jerked. The gun tilted hard right and slammed into the side rail. The gunner staggered, hands slipping off the grips as the mount twisted. The technical swerved. The driver fought the wheel. The vehicle fishtailed, then dropped into the depression at an angle, front left wheel biting hard. The truck stopped abruptly, nose down, rear up. The column behind it compressed. The second vehicle, the canvas-covered cargo, braked. Too late. It clipped the lead truck's rear corner and slid sideways, blocking the depression completely. 5 vehicles became one tangled problem. Sato didn't celebrate. She didn't speak. She watched for dismounts. Men spilled out of the vehicles. Not faceless. Not monsters. Bodies with weight. Hands with rifles. Heads turning fast, trying to find the shooter that had reached out from the ridge. They didn't scream. They moved with the same urgency Marines did, because physics made everyone honest. Sato keyed the radio. QRF halted at wash line. They will attempt foot movement in 90 seconds. Convoy needs to reposition now. Morales answered with the clipped voice of a leader whose plan had been forced into a new shape. Understood. We're moving the disabled truck. Cover. Sato looked down at the convoy. Marines were already hooking tow straps. The wrecker was repositioning, engine roaring. The rear security vehicle shifted to cover the north. Briggs, still beside her, watched the halt at the wash line with a kind of silent intensity. He wasn't sulking. He was learning in real time. He reached for his pack and pulled out his own rangefinder. Not asked, not told. He started ranging the dismounts. He began calling numbers to Devers, who fed them into the spotting scope data. Briggs wasn't the center anymore, but he was still useful. He chose to be useful. That choice mattered more than pride. Sato made a second calculation. The QRF was halted, but the environment would give them options. They could dismount and move along the depression line, using it as cover. They could split into two elements. They could try to flank east, force the convoy to fight in the open. Sato scanned for the comms vehicle, the sedan she had identified. It sat third in line, slightly off to the side, dust-coated. A man leaned into its passenger window, head down. Radio use. Coordination. If she cut their coordination, their movement would become less synchronized. Not because they were incompetent, but because coordination required infrastructure. She aimed at the sedan's front tire. A tire shot at range was not a movie trick. It was a small target. Rubber flexed. The angle mattered. But at 1,460 meters, with a clear line and a stable platform, it was doable. She adjusted for a micro shift in wind. The cord on the rock trembled twice, then steadied. She fired. The round hit the tire low. The rubber didn't explode. It collapsed. The sedan's front corner dipped, rim biting into dust. The man at the passenger window jerked back and fell, catching himself on his hands. He crawled, eyes wide, not sure where the shot had come from. The sedan was now immobile. The QRF's comms became hand signals and shouted instructions that didn't carry well in wind and distance. Sato keyed the net. Comms vehicle disabled. They're reduced to visual signals. Morales didn't respond with gratitude. She responded with action. Convoys braking. North element, push. South element, cover. The convoy's lead MRAP began to move again, slow at first, then steady. The tow strap tightened. The damaged truck lurched, then rolled. The wrecker pulled, tires biting. The convoy started to extricate itself from the kill zone. Sato watched the compound walls near the bend. The IED had been the first layer, the QRF the second. There was usually a third, not because the enemy was evil, but because layered plans were what worked when you had fewer resources and needed certainty. She looked for the third layer. She found it in absence. A section of compound wall that should have held a shadow did not. The shadow line had been flattened, as if someone had removed a tarp or opened a firing slit. Sato's left hand lifted slightly from the rifle, a small signal to herself. A behavioral tell of recognition. She keyed the radio. Convoy. Watch west wall. Firing slits likely open. Expect RPG at 400 meters. Morales's response was immediate. Copy. Gunners, eyes west. The convoy moved. The gunner on the rear security vehicle swung the heavy gun toward the wall, muzzle tracking. The RPG came anyway. It wasn't stopped by being expected. It was altered. The rocket left the slit and streaked toward the convoy, a bright line against dust. The gunner fired 2 short bursts. The rounds tore into the wall around the slit. The rocket passed through the air anyway and struck the ground short, detonating in dust and stone. The blast was loud, but not catastrophic. Fragments pinged against armor. Marines flinched, then continued. The third layer had been blunted not by luck, but by anticipation and suppression. Sato's warning had been refused earlier. Now her warnings were being used as tools. Information asymmetry was closing. The QRF at the wash line began to dismount in earnest. Small groups moved along the depression, heads low, rifles up. They were trying to do what Marines did. Close distance, find cover, create angles. Briggs leaned closer to Sato, voice low, clipped. They'll flank east. Sato didn't look at him. She watched the dust. Yes. One word. Agreement without warmth. Just shared geometry. Briggs swallowed once, then did something that mattered. He slid down the ridge line, lower, toward a position that gave him a different angle on the depression. He moved fast, but not reckless. He used the folds. He carried a spare ammo can for the ridge's automatic rifleman, because he had seen the convoy's north security starting to fire more than they wanted. He wasn't asking permission. He was executing a specific physical action in the middle of climax, under pressure, proving that when it mattered, He could be more than his earlier words. Devers tracked him with his eyes for a second, then returned to glass because the mission was still live. Quan stayed beside Sato, head down, listening to multiple nets at once. He was acting as a relay without being asked, filtering information, passing only what mattered. Then the radio crackled with a new voice. Not Morales, not battalion, another unit, another frequency. Ridge Overwatch. This is Reaper 2-1. We are 9.6 kilometers south. We have eyes on the wash line. Request target reference. Sato didn't answer with confusion. She answered with procedure. Reaper 2-1. Reference target is lead technical in depression. Grid 42S XD 320-1104682. Mark is disabled DSHK mount. Additional personnel along depression line moving east. The drone operator responded. Copy. We can provide ISR and laser if you have aircraft. Morales keyed in. We have no air in stack. Reaper 2-1 responded. Calm. Understood. We can still track movement. Sato didn't get emotional at the lack of air. Emotion didn't change assets. She adjusted her focus to the east flank. The depression line ended in a cluster of boulders that formed a natural break. If the QRF reached it, they could pop up and engage the convoy side at 220 meters. That would be close. That would be ugly. Sato measured the distance from the ridge to the boulders. 1,290 meters. She could hit that. But the boulders offered cover. Shots might not stop movement. She needed to shape their path, not just remove individuals. She looked for the logistic weakness. Ammo. Most fighting men carried 210 rounds if they were disciplined. That lasted minutes in a real fight. They would have a resupply point. Sato scanned back to the vehicles at the wash line. The canvas-covered cargo truck. It sat sideways, blocking. Its canvas was taut, but one corner had been ripped in the collision, exposing wooden crates inside. Crates of ammunition. Boxes of linked 12.7, possibly RPG rounds. Sato watched the men's behavior. Two of them moved back to the cargo truck repeatedly, each time returning forward with weight in their arms. Resupply. Confirmed. If she removed that truck, the foot movement would become temporary and cautious. She adjusted her reticle to the exposed crates. Ammunition cook-off required heat, pressure, or ignition. A 7.62 round into a crate would not reliably detonate everything. But the crates weren't just ammunition. There was something else. Sato saw it in the way the men handled one specific box. They moved it carefully, holding it level, avoiding jostle. Not because it was valuable, but because it was unstable. Explosives. Likely homemade charges. Packed. Wired. Ready. The box was placed under the truck bed near the rear axle, as if being staged. They were building something. A buy charge. Or a secondary blast. Or an attempt to collapse the depression line and block pursuit. Sato didn't assume. She watched one more cycle. A man crouched, pulled the box open, and revealed a spool of green wire. Another man held a small battery pack. Command detonation components. Real. Present. Sato's body remained flat, still. But her left hand shifted on the forend, tightening slightly. A behavioral tell. The moment she recognized the real second threat. Not the QRF itself. The QRF's charge. They were preparing a large command-detonated blast at the wash line, likely to catch any pursuing Marines if the convoy broke contact and tried to chase. A delayed kill. Sato keyed the radio. Morales. They're staging command wire and power at the cargo truck. If you pursue, they will detonate. Recommend no chase past the wash line. Morales responded with a voice of someone updating instantly. Understood. We're not chasing. We're extracting. Sato wasn't done. Even if the convoy didn't chase, the charge could still be used offensively. If they finished wiring, they could roll a vehicle forward as a bomb, or detonate to create dust and cover for flanking. Sato did not want a prolonged engagement. She wanted a clean exit. She had one shot available with the current rifle setup before wind changed again. She watched the box under the truck. A battery pack sat on the ground for 1 second. exposed. She adjusted her aim by 0.2 mils. She fired. The round hit the battery pack. The effect was immediate but not cinematic. A sharp flash, a small pop, then a violent ignition as the power source shorted into the wire spool and whatever it had been connected to. The stage charge did not detonate cleanly. It burned into itself, igniting one component, then another, until the entire underside of the cargo truck became a bright, violent bloom. The truck didn't explode like a movie. It tore. It burned. It rolled slightly, then settled. Ammunition began to cook off, rounds snapping and cracking, sending fragments in random arcs. The men around it scattered, thrown into disorganization. The depression line element hesitated. Not fear of death, fear of unknown, because their plan had just changed without their control. Sato keyed the net. Cargo truck ignited. Their resupply is compromised. Foot movement will slow. Reaper 2-1 confirmed from overhead. Visual on cook-off. Enemy movement dispersing. The convoy was now moving, speed increasing. The wrecker pulled the damaged truck around the crater's edge. The lead MRAP cleared the bend and pushed north, away from the compound walls. Morales' voice came through with controlled urgency. Ridge. We're clear in 60 seconds. Maintain overwatch. Then exfil. Sato kept her eyes on the QRF. A man rose from behind a boulder on the east flank with an RPG tube. He wasn't a villain. He was a fighter with a job. He aimed toward the convoy's rear vehicle, now moving. Distance from ridge, 1,310 meters. Wind, shifted slightly, left to right, 7 meters per second at ridge. Mirage, thickening. Sato held for wind. She didn't dial. Dialing was trusting machinery when time required mind. She fired. The round struck the RPG tube near the forward end. It didn't detonate the rocket. It knocked the tube sideways and threw the man off balance. He fell, behind the boulder, alive, but now with the weapon useless unless he stood again and exposed himself. He didn't. The convoy cleared. Morales' voice changed, a fractional release. Convoy is out. Sato didn't answer with relief. She answered with procedure. Ridge copies. Beginning exfil. Hale's voice came quietly on the net again. Clean. One word. Waited. The closest he came to praise during contact. Sato lifted her cheek from the stock. The world felt louder without the scope's tunnel. She handed the rifle back to Briggs without ceremony. No apology. No dominance. Just return of property. Briggs took it, eyes still on the valley. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then quietly clipped. I said things. Sato looked at his hands, then his face. She gave him the same neutral attention she gave Wind. Yes. Not accusation. Agreement. Briggs swallowed once. His voice stayed flat. I'll account for them. Sato nodded once. Noted. That exchange was not forgiveness or condemnation. It was accountability offered and received without performance. Quan rose first, sliding his radio harness tight. He looked toward the path down the ridge, then back to Sato. He spoke for the first time in minutes. One sentence. Route is 37 meters left. Less skyline. Sato didn't respond with good. She simply shifted her exfil route by 37 meters left, because it was correct. They moved. Down the ridge, careful, not rushing. Rushing made noise. Noise drew attention. The QRF was still alive. Still capable. Sato's notebook stayed in her pocket, tethered. Her pencil was secured. Nothing clattered. Behind them, the wash line burned and cracked. Ammunition cooking off in small, irregular pops. The sound carried in the dry air like distant hail. The desert did not care which side burned. It simply held the heat and waited. Back at the patrol base, the debrief space had been reset. Water jugs stood on the table. The whiteboard had new grid references written in clean marker strokes. A laptop was open, replaying drone footage on a delayed feed. Reaper 2-1's overhead view showed the convoy stop, the terrace collapse, the wash line halt, the cargo truck ignition. The footage was clinical. It reduced men to dots and lines. It showed motion and consequences without opinion. Morales stood at the head of the table again. Her posture was the same as earlier, but the room's posture around her had changed. Marines sat quieter. They listened with different ears. Hale stood near the wall, arms folded, eyes on the footage. He looked older in fluorescent light, the way mountains look older up close. Briggs sat on one side, hands clasped, rifle leaned against the wall behind him. His mouth was set, not defensive, processing. Devers sat beside him with a notebook open, writing down times and events, because the record mattered. Quan stood near the comms corner, headset hanging around his neck. He wasn't pretending to be invisible. He simply stayed where he could act if needed. Sato stood again, slightly back from the table, the same position as earlier. Not hiding, not claiming center. Morales began, voice controlled. Sequence. Contact initiated by heavy rifle from second terrace. Convoy halted by IED at the bend. Overwatch engaged. Enemy shooter neutralized by secondary explosion. She looked at Devers. Confirm which shooter placed around. Devers glanced at Briggs, then at Sato. He didn't dramatize it. Corporal Sato. The room absorbed that. No gasps. Just a quiet adjustment in the mental hierarchy. Morales continued. QRF approached from the north hardpan. Halted at wash line by precision fire on heavy weapon mount. Secondary engagements disabled comms vehicle, ignited cargo resupply, and denied RPG shot on convoy rear. She looked at Briggs. Sergeant Briggs. Your actions. Briggs didn't posture. He didn't claim more than he had. I engaged terrace shooter. Missed Dumirage and wind. Provided range data after Sato took the rifle. Moved to alternate angle and resupplied ridge element with one ammo can. Assisted in calling movement. Morales nodded once. Not punishment. Accuracy. She looked at Quan. Lance Corporal Quan. Quan spoke without emotion. Maintained retrans between ridge, convoy, battalion. Patched observer to fire desk. Prevented frequency drop when encryption fill failed at first contact. Morales's eyes narrowed slightly. Encryption fill failed. Quan lifted the handset and pointed to a small scuff section near the connector. Water and dust intrusion. The fill device desynced. I rebuilt the handshake manually. He didn't say it like a boast. He said it like a fact. A single precise technical action under pressure that no one else in the room could have done as well, because most people didn't know how. Morales nodded again, small. Noted. She turned her attention to Sato. Corporal. Sato's chin lifted a fraction. Present. Morales's voice shifted. Not warmer. More precise. You called the terrace grid before contact. You identified the QRF before we had eyes. You executed engagements that changed the fight. Explain why your file says comms and casualty collection. The room went still. This was not a public shaming. It was the moment the record was going to be set straight on the official record, in front of people who had made assumptions. Sato did not look down. She did not look at Briggs. She looked at Morales, because proper channels mattered even when you didn't need them. Ma'am, my current rank and billet are administrative. Morales waited. She didn't interrupt. That was leadership too. Sato continued. I am assigned here under a negotiated arrangement pending review. I do not self-assign authority. Morales's jaw tightened once. The smallest sign of frustration at the system, not at Sato. Pending review of what? Sato didn't answer with a story. She answered with an operational fact. An incident involving a training range and a safety violation. I stopped. The review is not complete. Briggs's eyes flicked up. He didn't speak. He listened. Morales held the pause for one beat longer than was comfortable. Then she spoke, voice level. I did not look at you. I looked at a file. The sentence landed hard because it contained no theatrics. It was ownership. She reached for the laptop and pulled up a personnel record attachment that she had clearly only just received. A PDF with a header line and an official seal. Morales read quietly for 6 seconds, eyes moving fast. Then she looked up. Corporal Sato. Your qualification record lists precision engagement instructor. Weapons training, battalion detachment. It lists a deployment as a designated marksman instructor. It lists an instructor credential I have never seen at your rank. Sato didn't react. No pride. No relief. Just stillness. Morales continued, and her words were now for the record. Effective immediately. You are assigned to Overwatch and Precision Engagement Advisory under my operational control. That is an order. Sato nodded once. Understood. Morales looked at the room. Any objections? No one spoke. Briggs's face was still, but his shoulders had lowered by a fraction, as if he had finally stopped holding himself up with the wrong beams. Hale's voice came from the wall, quiet. Good. One word. Final. The wise validator's authority in its most compressed form. Morales turned back to the laptop. Now, we have to account for confirmed effects. She gestured to the drone footage. Reaper 2-1's overhead view had been annotated by someone at higher headquarters. Small boxes marked positions. Numbers in the corner updated as the video played. Morales read the annotation aloud. Secondary explosion at terrace. One firing position removed. Wash line event. Heavy weapon disabled. Cargo truck ignited. Comms vehicle disabled. Subsequent overhead BDA indicates 138 hostile personnel were present within the QRF formation and its immediate support element at the wash line. The room shifted, not with celebration, with the sober weight of numbers. Morales kept reading, voice flat. Post-event thermal imagery indicates 138 targets neutralized or rendered combat ineffective due to the cargo ignition chain and subsequent cook-offs, combined with displacement and fragmentation injuries. This is recorded as a single initiating shot, impacting the stage power source. She looked at Sato again. One shot. Sato didn't nod. She didn't accept a medal in her mind. She simply let the record exist. Briggs's hand tightened once on his own notebook. Devers stared at the screen, then at Sato's hands, as if trying to reconcile the precision of a trigger press with the scale of the consequence. Hale watched the footage without expression. He had seen numbers before. He knew they were never clean. Morales closed the laptop halfway, as if sealing the moment. This will be transmitted to Battalion as part of the official after-action. She looked around the room again. This is not a story. This is a record. Our decisions will be judged by the record. No one argued. The debrief continued into details. Ammo expenditure, vehicle damage, medical status, tow strap failure points. It was clinical because it had to be. Then Morales dismissed the room in stages. Devers, full written timeline by 2 hours. Briggs, weapons maintenance and a statement for the record. Quan, comms report and retrans diagram. Master Guns, I need 3 minutes. Hale didn't respond. He stayed. Sato remained too, not because she wanted to linger, but because she didn't leave until dismissed. Morales looked at her. Corporal. Stay. Sato nodded once. The room emptied, leaving only Morales, Hale, and Sato. The generator hummed outside. Dust tapped lightly at the tent seams. The environment pressed in quietly, indifferent to rank and paperwork. Morales spoke first, voice lower now private. I should have read your full file before we rolled. Sato didn't soften her face. She didn't offer comfort. She simply stood. Yes, ma'am. Morales's mouth tightened once, not anger, but the controlled discomfort of a leader recognizing a gap in her process. Hale's eyes moved between them. He spoke quiet. I did not speak earlier because the room wasn't ready. Morales nodded slightly. I understand. Hale looked at Sato. You kept your pace. Sato's eyes stayed steady. Yes, Master Guns. Hale held the silence for a moment, then added a sentence that explained something without explaining everything. I failed one like you once. Sato didn't ask for details. She didn't lean in. She respected the boundary the sentence created. Hale continued, as if the words had been waiting for years. He got loud because nobody listened. Then they wrote him off as the problem. Morales's eyes flicked to Hale, then back to Sato. She understood what he was saying. Loudness as a survival tactic. Punished as a character flaw. Sato remained still. She had not gotten loud. Not because she was better, Because she had learned a different lesson. Morales spoke again, private now, clipped. I want your full background. Not the version that got filtered. I want it from you. Sato didn't answer with a speech. She answered with the minimum required. Ma'am, I was not demoted for incompetence. Morales waited. Sato continued. I was reduced in rank temporarily pending review, because I refused to sign off on an unsafe live-fire evolution that would have put 17 Marines in the danger fan. Morales's eyes narrowed. 17. Sato nodded once. 17. The range officer wanted the schedule met. The safety template was altered. I halted the line. Morales's jaw set. And they punished you. Sato corrected her with a precision that mattered. They initiated an administrative action. I negotiated this deployment as a condition to remain in service while the review was pending. Morales absorbed that. Negotiated arrangement pending review. Not exile. Not punishment. A compromise with a system that sometimes protected itself first. Hale's mouth tightened once. He didn't speak. The silence was his verdict. Morales's voice was quiet. You didn't say any of that earlier. Sato's answer was immediate. Ma'am, it wasn't asked. And it doesn't change wind. A single sentence that revealed her character without claiming virtue. Morales looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Understood. She reached into a folder on the table and pulled out a printed message sheet, fresh from higher headquarters. It had an official header and a signature block. Morales read it aloud, because this was where institutional vindication became concrete. Effective immediately, Corporal Aiko Sato is restored to previous rank pending final review outcome, and reassigned to Precision Engagement Advisory under Weapons Training Battalion Authority, while attached to this unit. This is directed by order. She looked up. This came in 14 minutes ago. Sato's face did not change, but her hands shifted slightly at her sides, fingers flexing once, then settling. A small behavior, the only visible sign that the record mattered. Morales held the paper out. Sato took it with both hands, careful, as if it might tear under careless grip. She read it once. Then she folded it exactly along the same crease lines it had been printed with. She didn't smile. She didn't thank anyone. She simply placed it in her notebook between pages where it wouldn't be lost. Morales watched that behavior. Hale spoke quietly. Keep your books. Sato nodded. Yes, Master Guns. Morales's voice softened by 1 degree. Earned warmth, reserved brief. You did good work today. The sentence was stripped of decoration. That made it heavier. Sato responded with the economy of someone who didn't waste words. Thank you, ma'am. Morales stood straighter, as if closing a loop. Dismissed. Sato stepped out of the tent. Outside, the air had cooled by a small margin. Not mercy, just physics. The sun had shifted. Shadows were longer. The valley looked the same as it had in the morning, because the environment didn't mark human events. The desert doesn't care how clean your record is. It only cares whether your decisions match reality. Sato walked toward the far side of the perimeter, where a low berm faced open ground. The same direction she had been drawn to earlier. A place where she could watch without being watched. Quan met her near the comms rack, moving in the same quiet way he had moved all day. He didn't speak at first. He held out a small laminated card. A frequency plan. Updated. Clean. Sato took it and slid it into her notebook. Quan's voice was low, clipped. You said patch me. I did. Sato looked at him. Not warmly. Precisely. Yes. Quan nodded once. That was his acknowledgement. Confirmation receipt. Briggs approached later, not immediately. He waited until the perimeter noise had settled and fewer eyes were around. His posture was different now. Not smaller. More honest. He held his rifle case in one hand. In the other, a small bag of cleaning patches. He stopped at a respectful distance. Not because he feared her. Because he understood distance. He spoke with the same clipped tone as always, but the content was different. I was wrong. Sato didn't move. Briggs continued, voice flat. I made it social. That was my choice. I'll account for it with the platoon. Sato watched his hands. They were steady. He wasn't performing for an audience. There was none. She nodded once. Accountability is enough. Briggs swallowed once. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He had already decided he didn't deserve it as a transaction. He spoke again. I want you on the ridge next time. Not because of today. Because you were already there. Sato didn't answer with pride. Noted. Briggs exhaled slowly, then did something small. He opened the rifle case slightly and showed her the turret cap. The pencil line she had made was still there. He didn't erase it. He didn't protect his ego by pretending it hadn't existed. He closed the case. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Hale found her near the berm later, when the sky had begun to fade into a harder blue. He didn't approach like a father figure. He approached like a man who had learned that presence could be enough. He sat on a low crate beside her, facing the open ground. They watched the desert for 19 seconds without speaking. Then Hale spoke, quiet. You didn't raise your voice once. Sato's eyes stayed on the horizon. No. Hale nodded slightly. Good. One word again. His vocabulary was a weapon. He used it sparingly. Sato didn't ask about the one he had failed. She didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered. Hale looked at her notebook, visible in her hand now, and spoke with a slight shift. They'll put you back where you belong, but the system will pretend it was always going to. Sato wrote one line, not because she needed it, but because writing kept the world honest. She didn't write his sentence. She wrote her own record of what mattered. Hale watched her pencil move. You still writing after contact? Yes. Hale's eyes narrowed slightly, as if seeing the line, even without reading it. Show me. Sato didn't hesitate. She opened the notebook to the page with the columns and the terse notes. Glass, shoulder, dust fall. Mirage layer. Wash line. Battery pack. Hale read it in silence. His finger traced the grid reference once, stopping at the same number she had written twice. He looked up. Same grid you wrote earlier. Yes. Hale leaned back slightly. That's what people miss, he said. They think competence is the shot. It's the preparation. Sato didn't nod. She wrote another line. Preparation is visible. Hale saw it, and his face did something rare. The corners of his mouth moved a fraction. Not a smile. A recognition. He spoke, quiet, as if sealing something. Welcome back. 2 words. Earned warmth. Understated. Heavy. Sato's eyes stayed on the desert. Yes, Master Guns. The generator hummed behind them. The patrol base's lights flickered on. Dust floated through the air in thin sheets. The environment did not shift its standards because humans had corrected a file. It simply continued. Later, when the base had settled into the low-noise routine of evening, Sato walked alone to the same rock shoulder on Ridge 17. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because she returned to places where truth had been expensive. She moved without a flashlight for the last 120 meters, using the starlight and the shape of rocks. The ridge was familiar now. It had always been familiar. She had been there before anyone saw her. She lay behind the split rock again. The cord was still there, pinned under the flat stone. It had not been disturbed. It hung slack because the wind had shifted lower. She watched the valley. The wash line was dark now, but a faint glow still pulsed from the cargo truck's remains. Heat lingering, metal cooling slowly. No shots, no engines. Just the quiet weight of a place that had hosted violence and then returned to its own rhythms without reflection. The desert doesn't forgive emotion. It doesn't punish it either. It simply doesn't account for it. Sato opened her notebook. She didn't write a summary. She didn't write a lesson. She wrote the kind of private note that belonged only to someone who understood that records mattered. But not all records were meant for systems. She wrote one word. Reinstated. She did not underline it. She closed the notebook and held it in her hand for 8 seconds, feeling the paper's weight, the pencil's tether against her wrist. Then she placed the notebook in her pack, settled her cheek against the stock of her own rifle now, and watched the valley until her breathing matched the stillness. Far below, the road remained a scar in stone, unchanged. The desert kept its rules. Sato stayed on the ridge until the valley's last heat signatures dimmed into ordinary rock. She didn't hunt for bodies. She didn't scan for trophies. She watched for patterns that would repeat. The way the wash lines smoke thin told her how long the wind would keep a scent of burned powder in the low ground. The way the mirage settled told her when the temperature gradient would flatten enough to trust glass again. She made a small adjustment to her sling and felt the strap bite into the same spot on her shoulder it always had. Familiar pressure, familiar weight. She let it remind her that today's outcome had been built out of routine, not inspiration. When she finally stood, she did it in 2 deliberate stages. First, knees under hips, then hips under shoulders. No sudden silhouette, no unnecessary skyline. Even after contact, she moved as if someone was still trying to earn an angle on her. Down the slope, she stopped the place where she had first tested the wind with sand. She pinched another small handful and let it fall. Different drift now. Lower, slower. The valley had cooled by degrees that would have mattered to a bullet, and not at all to a person. She didn't smile at the change. She wrote it down anyway. Back at the patrol base, the night guard rotation had already started. Marines moved through the perimeter lanes with rifles at low ready, their faces lit by thin red beams from covered flashlights. They weren't afraid. They were disciplined. Sato entered the comms area without announcing herself. Quan looked up immediately, not startled, because he had been listening for the exact scrape of her boots on gravel. He didn't ask where she had been. He slid a headset toward her, cable untangled, volume already set low. On a bench beside him lay a thin stack of printed reports. Comms logs, frequency shifts, packet loss, retrans timing, all the invisible work that kept a fight from becoming isolated noise. Sato sat and read without rushing. Her eyes moved in a consistent rhythm across the lines, pausing only where data changed unexpectedly. A drop transmission at the moment the terrace shooter's rhythm accelerated. A brief encryption resync that Quan had rebuilt by hand. A battalion acknowledgement of the Iron Wolf call sign, stamped with a time and a routing code. She tapped one line with her pencil. Quan leaned in. That one. Sato nodded once. That one. Quan waited. His stillness was not passivity. It was readiness. Sato spoke in a low voice. Next time, battalion will hesitate less if the routing code is pre-registered on our side. They won't have to verify under stress. Quan's fingers moved immediately, pulling up a settings screen on the radio unit. I can do that now. Sato watched his hands. Calm. Exact. No wasted motion. He didn't look at her for approval. He looked at the interface, because the interface was what could fail. He executed the change, then paused, waiting for the last step. Sato said one word. Commit. Quan committed the change. He sat back and exhaled once, quiet. Then he spoke, clipped. You said prepare. I did. Sato looked at him. Yes. He nodded once. That was the end of his need for recognition. The action had been the point. Across the base, in a small open area lit by 2 vehicle headlights angled inward, Briggs stood in front of a half-circle of Marines from his platoon. He wasn't standing there to perform remorse. He was standing there because social damage required social repair, and he understood that now. His voice carried just enough to be heard. No more. I put someone in a lane because of a patch and a rank. He held the pause for a beat, then continued. I ran my mouth. That was my call. It made us slower. No one interrupted, not because they were afraid of him, but because his sentence had the plainness of truth. It didn't invite argument. Briggs looked at Sato when she approached the edge of the light. He didn't ask her to speak. He didn't drag her into his accountability to prove it was real. He finished with the last necessary piece. Next time we take input based on the content, not the collar. He stepped back. He didn't wait for applause. There wasn't any. The Marines dispersed without comments. They had absorbed the correction. Briggs walked toward Sato, stopping at a careful distance again. He held out a small object, a strip of electrical tape. Sato looked at it once and understood what it was for. A low-profile way to mark a turret reference without scratching the metal. a way to keep a pencil line from smearing in heat and dust. Briggs's voice stayed flat. Your mark. Make it permanent. Sato took the tape and folded it once, then twice, aligning edges precisely. She didn't thank him. She didn't reject the gesture. She said one sentence. Keep it on your rifle, not mine. Briggs nodded, a small acceptance. He wasn't trying to give her his identity now. He was trying to keep his own honest. Master Gunnery Sergeant Hale watched the exchange from the edge of the light, hands behind his back. His face was unreadable, but his posture had a subtle ease to it, the way a structure eases when a load shifts into the correct beams. He didn't speak until Briggs had walked away. Then he said, quiet, you teach tomorrow. Sato's eyes lifted to him. Yes, Master Guns. Hale didn't add good work. He didn't need to. He had already said clean. He had already said welcome back. His approval was not a feeling. It was placement. The next morning, Morales called a formation that wasn't ceremonial, but had the weight of one. The Marines stood in two short ranks inside the perimeter, rifles slung, boots on packed dust. The sun was still low enough to cast long shadows that made everyone look thinner and older than they were. Morales stood in front, uniform crisp, eyes steady. She held a folder in her left hand. Paperwork, the kind that changed lives without any noise. Hale stood off to the side, arms folded, as if he were there by accident, which was how he preferred to appear. Sato stood in the front rank, one place back from the center, not hiding, not seeking. Morales opened the folder and read. Her voice was clinical. By direction of higher headquarters, administrative action pending review is modified. Rank restoration effective immediately. Precision engagement authority recognized for operational use while attached to this unit. She paused, eyes lifting from paper to Sato's collar. Sergeant Sato. The word changed the air. Not because of romance. Because systems had weight. Sato's hands moved once, small and controlled, to the collar points of her blouse. She removed the lower insignia and replaced it with the restored chevrons she had kept sealed in her notebook, protected from dust by plastic and habit. She didn't fumble. She didn't rush. Her fingers aligned the pins with the holes in one smooth motion, as if the cloth had been waiting for them. The Marines watched, quiet. Morales continued reading. Call sign Ironwolf is recognized and authorized for use in this theater under battalion record. A few heads shifted slightly. Not gossip. Acknowledgement. Morales closed the folder and looked up. This does not change how we operate. It changes what we failed to see. She held the silence for 2 seconds, then dismissed them without flourish. Back to work. After formation, Morales walked to Sato's side without calling her over. A leader closing distance on purpose. Her voice was low. I read everything last night. Sato's posture remained neutral. She didn't lean forward. She didn't retreat. Morales continued. The training range incident. The altar template. The signatures. Her jaw tightened once. You were right. Sato didn't accept the statement as praise. She treated it as a correction to the record. Yes, ma'am. Morales's eyes stayed on Sato's collar for one beat, then lifted to her face. I'm going to put you where the file says you should be, not where I put you. Sato nodded once. Understood. Morales hesitated for a fraction, then spoke the sentence that mattered. I will not hide behind procedure when the procedure is wrong. Sato watched her hands, still. No nervous movement. The sentence was not a promise made to feel good. It was a commitment made to be used. Sato answered with the minimum required. Noted. On the ridge later that day, Sato taught without teaching like a performer. She had Briggs and Devers lie in their usual positions. She had them build their rifles the way they always did. She didn't insult their competence. She didn't elevate her own. She corrected one behavior at a time, through demonstration. She took a strip of tape and placed it on Devers's spotting scope tripod leg, marking the exact notch that leveled the scope on uneven rock. A repeatable reference. No guessing. No feel. She had Briggs look through the scope at a target rock downrange, then had him shift his head position by 2 centimeters. The Mirage band changed. The rock's edge sharpened. Briggs blinked once. He hadn't known head position could cut Mirage like that. Sato didn't say, "I'm better," she said quietly. "Mirage is an optical problem first." Briggs nodded, absorbing it without pride. Sato placed 2 stones on the ridge in front of them, creating a narrow gap. A crude aperture, like she had used during contact. "Use this when the low ground lies," she said. Devers tried it. The target sharpened. Devers's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't waste words. His eyes stayed on the sight picture. Sato watched their breathing patterns, not as judgment, but as diagnostics. Briggs held too long, and then exhaled too sharply. Devers inhaled shallow and fast when he got excited. She corrected without scolding. "Inhale. Pause. Let the shot arrive." Devers adjusted and steadied. Briggs asked one question, because he could not ask it. "How did you know the battery pack would matter?" Sato didn't answer with legend. She pointed with the tip of her pencil to the wash line on the map. "Because they handled it carefully," she said. "Careful handling means fragility. Fragility means leverage." Briggs held the silence for a beat, then nodded. The lesson wasn't about violence. It was about observation. Below, the valley looked empty, because the enemy had pulled back after losing its resupply and coordination. They weren't evil for leaving. They were rational. They had updated to new information, the same way Marines had. The desert didn't reward righteousness. It rewarded adaptation. Late afternoon brought a vehicle from battalion. A dust-coated truck with a single antenna and a driver who didn't look around like a tourist. A staff sergeant stepped out with a hard case and a clipboard. He didn't waste time with greetings. He approached Morales and handed over a sealed envelope and a small metal box. Morales opened the envelope, read once, and her posture shifted subtly. Not surprise. Confirmation. She walked to where Sato stood near the berm. "Sergeant," she said. Sato turned, attentive. Morales held out the small metal box. Inside was a badge. Not a medal. A qualification insignia with a serial number etched into it. Precision Engagement Instructor, reissued, officially recorded. Morales's voice stayed flat. "This is yours. Revalidated. Recorded." Sato took the box with both hands and closed it carefully. She didn't pin it on immediately. That wasn't her way. Morales added one more piece, the most concrete kind. "And this," she said, tapping the paper. "Your review board date is confirmed. They're moving it forward." Sato's eyes didn't widen. She didn't show relief. But her left hand tightened slightly on the box, then relaxed. A small tell. A person allowing a fraction of weight to shift off a spine that had been carrying it. Morales watched that tell and didn't comment on it. "Go get ready," Morales said. "We roll again in 36 hours. Sato nodded. "Yes, ma'am." That night, Sato returned to the ridge again, alone. Not because she was haunted. Because she trusted solitude more than crowds. She lay behind the split rock and watched the valley until the stars held steady. She opened her notebook to a clean page. She wrote the formal things first. Grid references. Wind notes. Mirage bands by time of day. A short list of terrain points that could become problems if ignored. Then she turned to the inside cover, where she kept a private ledger separate from operational data. She wrote one line. 138 wasn't a number. It was a consequence. She didn't elaborate. She didn't justify. She didn't sentimentalize. She let the sentence exist because it needed to exist somewhere that wasn't an after-action report. She closed the notebook and sat with it in her hands for a long time, still enough that the dust around her settled. Then she wrote one more word beneath reinstated, smaller, almost hidden. Continue. She closed the notebook again. In the valley below, the wash line smoke was gone. The road was the same scar. The stones held the same heat. The wind moved the same way it always had when the sun lost altitude. Nothing in the environment marked what had been corrected in human paperwork. The desert kept its rules, and it kept moving.